In this video, we talk about language and thought. What is the relationship between language and thought? Are they related to each other or are they unrelated to each other? Which one determines the other one? Is it possible to think without language? Let's read this extract from George Orwell. It was intended that when Newspeak had been adopted once and for all, and all the speaks forgotten, a heretical thought, that is, a thought diverging from the principles of Ingsoc, should be literally unthinkable, at least so far as thought is dependent on words. Or Wittgenstein says, the limits of my language means the limits of my word. But is it really so? So that if you change the language of some people, then they would not be able to think about the same ideas and they have been able to think about in their previous language, so that it would be unthinkable? Or is it really that if you do not have, for example, a word in your language, then you would not be able to experience it, so that your language would determine your world? What would be your world? The ideas that are mentioned here are at the basis of Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. These are two American linguists. They have studied different languages, and Sapir in his book Language has said, language is a guide to social reality. Human beings do not live in the objective world alone, nor alone in the world of social activity as ordinarily understood, but very much at the mercy of the particular language which has become the medium of expression for their society. So here it says, if there is any reality, then it is the result of the language. No two languages are ever sufficiently similar to be considered as representing the same social reality. So then, if languages are different, social realities are different. The words in which different societies live are distinct words, not merely the same word with different labels attached. So then, two different languages, two different social realities, and two different worlds. We see here and otherwise experience very largely as we do because the language habits of our community predispose certain choices of interpretation. So then, here it says that it's the language that determines our experiences, our interpretation of the world, how we experience the world, how we perceive the world. And Whorf, another linguist, in his book Language, Thought and Reality, has said the background linguistic system of each language is itself the shaper of ideas. So it shapes. The language shapes ideas. They program and guide. So it's a program. It programs what to do and what not to do. The language. It limits you. It's like a prison. We dissect nature along the lines laid down by our native languages. So if you have, for example, a word for the different kinds of fish, then you would be able to say which one is more tasty than another. Or for the different kinds of dates, well, you would not be able to dissect that word just because you do not have the word for the different types of it. But is it possible that we are not able to taste the different kinds of dates and then say that this one is more tasty than another one without naming them, without knowing the proper noun in order to refer to them? Well, it seems that we are able to do that our experiences is not determined by language, but that we have our senses, and our senses would help us experience different things. And then when we need them, when we need a certain object, when we see that, for example, the different kinds of fish is important. In that case, we start having names for the fish. But if we do not need them, for example, if we know that, well, it might be the case that at some point we buy fish and eat it, then you would not mind having different labels for the different kinds of fish. The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, or linguistic determinism, then says the language we speak determines the way we perceive and think about the world. In this case, language would be a filter. And you cannot see the world unless through this filter. If you do not have a word for a certain kind of fish, then you would not know that fish, and it would not be part of your world because your language has filtered it out. Based on this, language is a prison. Like you are prisoned within a language, and it is not possible for you to go out of this prison and to experience the world outside of your language, beyond what is included in your language. For evidence, they have given example from Eskimo language Inuit that has more than 50 words for snow, and they say that, well, these people would have a different worldview because they have different words for the different kinds of snow compared to English speakers. Or Hopi Indians, they do not have tense in their language. That is, they do not have an ed inflectional morpheme to show the past tense or any will in their language in order to show future. And therefore, as a result of that, they have concluded that for Hopi Indians, time is different from time that is experienced by English speakers who have a tense and they have time in their sentences. A light version of linguistic determinism says that, yeah, we accept it, that languages would encode different categories, and the speakers of different languages think about the word in different ways. In this case, it says that, well, they would perceive the word in different way, they would think about the word in different ways just because they have encoded different categories and they have not focused on certain categories, but it doesn't mean that they would be completely prisoned by that language. Just because their language doesn't have a certain word for a certain category, then they would not be able to think about it or experience it. For example, Russian have 2 words for blue. One for dark blue, sine, and one for light blue, голубой. So then they divide the color continuum differently from that of English speakers. Or Spanish speakers, they have rincon and esquina in order to refer to inside of a corner or outside of a corner. But English speakers, if they want to say the same thing, they cannot use one single word as they have used rincon or esquina, but that they have to use a phrase in order to talk about that. How far does linguistic determinism hold? Well, there are counter-arguments in the very fact that we can learn a language in the first place, that we are born and we learn a language, or that we can learn a second language, or that we can learn a foreign language. We are foreign language learners. We have learned another language. How would it be possible if we are present within our language? Or translation. Translation is also a counter-argument to this hypothesis. well, it's possible to read text in one language and then to express that in another language. However, they would not be the same, but it doesn't mean that we are present by that. The differences might be because some of these categories might not have been important in another language, so that they come up with lexical items for that, for those concepts. And creation of new words for concepts and objects for which the language has no words. Well, we are creating new words. There is a Persian academy or French academy or English academy, and they are creating new words. And people are adding new words because of, for example, technology, inventions, because they come up with new ideas and then they think of having words in order to signify them, to represent them in their language, to code them in their language. And we have experiments that show senses are the source of perception rather than language. In languages that have, for example, a distinction between dark and light, black and white, and they do not have the other divisions in the color continuum, well, they have been able to discriminate the different colors. For example, they could say that a certain object is in a different color if it's been red. That is, they have been able to discriminate the color. Do we have any evidence for linguistic relativism? Yes. The experiments have shown that those who have more categories, they have been able to do better color categorization because they have a label to store and access information. For example, in a language which is spoken in New Guinea, they have only two color words, black and white, or dark and light. And in English, you know that we have many different colors. So if speakers of English and speaker of Grand Valley Dani are given a task in order to categorize objects based on colors, well, the English would do better, and it's because they have a label to store and access information. Or in simple perception tasks, for example, in a task that has been given to English and Russian participants, the Russian participants have done better in discriminating dark and light blue compared to English speakers. We have different performance between speakers of languages with gender distinction when they have been asked to describe an object. For example, bridge. Bridge in Spanish is a masculine name, and in German it is a feminine name. And when these participants, the participants who have been Spanish and German, when they have been asked to describe a bridge, Spanish participants have used more masculine words for bridge, like strong, stony, but German participants have used words that are more feminine, like fragile, for example, or pretty. You see that the adjectives that they have used is affected by the kind of by the gender that they have thought of for that object. If you think of bridge as a masculine, then they would use words that show the strengths of it. For example, long, strong, big. But in German, they have used pretty, beautiful, elegant, or fragile. From this, we can conclude that humans have a tendency to anthropomorphize objects, and this tendency is enhanced if a language has grammatical gender. One thing about changing languages, as George Orwell had said, that if you change the language, then it would result in a new thinking. Well, actually, this has been done in different languages when a word has taken on negative meaning, then they have decided to change it for a word that is more positive. But the thing is that after a while, that word also takes on negative meaning, and so this process goes on, and this is called euphemism treadmill. For example, for the negative word cripple, they have thought to use handicapped to get rid of those negative associations. But then after a while, this has become negative. They have used disabled. Again, this has become a negative word. Then they have decided unimpaired. And finally, they have come to challenged. So you see that, well, we try to change the word in order to get rid of the negative associations of those words. And this has also been done by politicians. But the thing is that after a while, because of all the circumstances that go on in human communities, the words would change their meaning. And this is completely natural, that words would change their meaning over time and they take on new connotations. So in chapter 1, we talked about first what is linguistic knowledge, and we talked about universal properties of human language, and we explored whether animals can learn the language, and we finished this chapter with the relationship between language and thought, and if language is a vehicle that determines how we think, and we, in that case, if we are prisoners of our language, or that language influences our life, but we are not the prisoners of it. We can change our language